Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Science of the Times. I'm Tim Colson.
Hi, I'm Simon Khalid.
And what have you been up to this week, Simon? Just working. I think you've had a crazy busy week from the difficulty of scheduling this call.
I have, yeah, but you've had a much more exciting week. Well, today I just turned on the radio and heard you on Live Scientific.
I know. I know. It was a real surprise, but delight to be asked to go on. I went up and recorded about a month ago, and obviously by the time this comes out, it's going to be a few days out since it was released. But I think if listeners want to hear even more of me waffling on, they can find it on the BBC iPlayer app. So
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It was a lot of fun. I learned stuff about you I didn't know, so that was good.
okay, they were pretty good at weaseling out information. So, and the paperback of my book comes out on Thursday as well. So that's exciting. So,
Yeah, really exciting week for you.
no, it is a good week. But we're going to do something a little bit different this week, right?
Yeah, for sure. So we thought it'd be, I mean, it's a good time to sort of sit back, maybe have a reflection on, our journey as podcasters so far, and maybe address some of the questions that we've been sent in.
No, I think that's right because we've been going about 4 months now. I think it's gone pretty quickly, and we're kind of making a bit of progress though. We're up to about 1,250 odd subscribers at the moment, and it's going up really quickly. We've got 250 or so in the last day, didn't we? So, and
Yeah.
some of the podcasts are getting about 9,000 views. Others not quite so much. But I didn't really know what to expect. But I don't know what you thought. I'm quite happy with this. Are you?
Yeah, me too. I mean, both the sort of the attention we're getting, but also just doing it's a lot of fun, and we're meeting great guests. I guess we may do otherwise being in Oxford, but it wouldn't be at the same frequency.
No, I think that's right. And I think we should give a big shout out to Rich and Debs, our producers at Streaming Spires, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. They do a great job, complete professionals, and also they put up with the two of us, right? Being prima donnas.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I mean, of all the kind of I know that we shouldn't kind of call them favorites, but are there any that you've kind of particularly surprised you or you've kind of particularly enjoyed?
I think I think there were things in the one we did with Nilo and Ben that despite sort of being interested in birds sort of tangentially, there was new things I learned in that one. But I think for me, the one that perhaps had the most impact was one we did with Paul Behrens. I really I learned that the sort of the changes we have to make are not huge, actually.
That sustainability one, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, that
Yeah,
was
the
that was good.
sustainability one. I think for me that was sort of just that it you see two ends of the spectrum. You hear all the doom and gloom, and then you hear the people who think everything's fine and we don't have to make any changes. And this was a sort of a quantified way that said, actually, we do have to make changes. We have to make them now, but they're not huge.
And although, not all of my meals are vegan, my supper this evening was a vegan meal. So,
Excellent.
there you go.
So in the same vein, which ones have you had, you've been surprised by?
So I really enjoyed the one about Osiris Rex, flying down onto Bennu and doing the touch and go maneuver, and then when we discussed kind of life getting started, I think I just think I like the technology behind that, the fact that we're able to produce this spacecraft that flies all the way, is out there for years
Yeah.
and comes back with this material. And I thought talking to Sarah Russell in particular about that mission was just fantastic. I thought that was great. So yeah, that was good. But we have got various questions, haven't we,
Mm,
that have come up. So perhaps in the first, well, perhaps what we should do is kind of run through those questions and see if we can answer them
sure.
to the satisfaction of our listeners. So
So
yeah,
shall I kick
these
us
have
off?
been, yeah. So but I think we'd just say these have been emailed just in case some of our listeners don't know how to do them. These have come into the Science of the Times podcast at gmail.com. And so that should be on the web page. So people can get in contact us there, or of course they can write comments after the episodes. But
We
yeah,
can, I guess we, sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, we can put it in the bit below as well. This.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we tend to reply fairly quickly to the ones that do come on YouTube for sure, because we see them immediately.
We do certainly try, but yeah, but I think it's nicer now to do a question and answer every
Yeah.
now and again. So yeah, do you want to kick off? I think you've got a yeah,
Yeah,
we can go
well,
backwards and forwards. Yeah.
sure. So actually, as you were saying, so we have a question on the Osiris Rex one. So we've been asked, do we think scientists will ever make life in the test tube?
So I guess my take on this is I think we will. I think we will be able to get to a point when we can make simple artificial life in the laboratory. I think it will actually be driven by computer models, actually. I think as we're working out, so a lot of research in this area kind of works out how various chemical reactions, I mean, you know this better than me, chemical reactions work. And we know there are three things that have to come together for sort of life to work. You need some sort of autocatalytic molecule, so molecules that can make copies of themselves when there's the right building blocks there. You need some energy to drive that. So, and that often comes in the form of reactive, probably early life, it came in the form of reactive chemicals, hydrogen sulfide, things like that. And then you need to be able to put membranes around it all to form a sort of proto cell. And those membranes form quite quickly. And I think we're getting quite a good idea of sort of all of the molecules that are found in space that have rained down on the early Earth, including from these trips to Bennu. Yeah, so I think that maybe within the next couple of decades, perhaps we'll discover that we'll work that out. What about you? What would your take be?
I think so too. I mean, I think, yeah, there's this issue of enough energy in the right place at the right time to be able to make and break chemical bonds. At the end of the day, that's what it's down to. The membrane will self-assemble. So I think we will get there. Funnily enough, actually, years ago when I was at University of Southampton, a colleague was trying. He'd had these big vats in which he'd put sort of primordial soup, and
Yeah.
every now and then zap them with electricity to see if he could get something. As far as I know, there was no life in those, you know, in those vats. But I think it's one of those things that scientists have been trying for years and years, right? Ever since, it's almost slightly Baron Frankenstein type of thing, right? I think it's fascinated people for a long time.
I think that's right, and I think so I think I think we will get there. I think it's going to be a bit of a journey, and it's interesting, kind of including some of the people we talk to, thinking about that kind of life biology interface. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's something we'll probably come back to in future episodes, I imagine.
I think so for sure.
So I've got one for you, so which came up after the snake venom episode. So this is when we talked to David Baker, who won the Nobel Prize for this, and about making designer proteins and designer enzymes. And so someone wrote in that they had a relative who'd got a genetic disease and wondering whether it will ever be possible to design proteins to make to relieve symptoms or cure these diseases. So, I mean, this is kind of closer to your area. Is that something that you think is going to be possible? We briefly mentioned this, I think, towards the end of the episode, and that's probably what spurred this question on.
Yeah, I think that's got to be the aim, and I think that's and it's a combination of actually it's probably a combination of two of our episodes, the designer protein one and the DNA sequencing one.
Mm.
Right, so at some point we have to identify what the genes encode for,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
what the protein will be, and what it predict what it will look like. Then, if there's mutations in those proteins, how they manifest, what effect that has, and then you get to the point of designing something that either that regulates that protein. Either it makes it work faster, or it stops it working, or it blocks access to it, much like they did with the protein that was neutralizing the snake venoms. So I actually think that the basic technology tools are there for that one.
Yeah, no, well, that's exciting. I mean, there'll be lots of questions, I imagine, about the ethics of doing that, and that's probably not necessarily for scientists to answer, but at least we can kind of feed in what's possible and work out ways to cure things. But hopefully, for many of these diseases, there will be new types of cures coming up in due
Yeah, and
course.
I guess the cure doesn't have to be at the genetic level. It can be in the form of something you have to take.
That's right. So yeah.
So the ethics there are less worrisome than if it was at the genetic level.
I think that's right. So if you can somehow replace a protein that's not functioning with one that does, then
Yes,
and get it targeted at the right place, that would be pretty good. So, well, again, I'm sure that's something we're gonna come back to.
I, I think so. Okay, so one for you now, Tim. Actually, yes, this is close to sort of your expertise, I guess, in some ways. In some ways, will we will we ever be able to create dogs that are the size of elephants?
I'm not sure why we'd want to do that. Imagine, imagine how much food you'd have to buy for a dog that size. I mean, certainly the largest predators, land predators to have ever existed would have been some of the giant dinosaurs, and even T-Rex would not have been anywhere near as heavy as an elephant. They were pretty big animals, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of probably pushing the size of a top size of a predator.
Yeah.
I mean, we can keep selecting for dogs to get bigger and bigger. But you eventually run up into a limit, obviously. So, and those limits are determined by the, so big animals, they create quite a lot of heat, particularly if they're sort of running around or whatever. And actually dissipating that heat is a challenge for animals. So, it means
Yeah.
they're burning, their cells are working hard. They've got to somehow get rid of that heat. So, if we do, I suspect they'd be more at home in colder environments than in warm environments, being warm-blooded
Right.
animals. So you could certainly select them to get bigger and bigger, but I'm not sure where you'd want to. Where would you keep it? Imagine an elephant-sized dog jumping on your bed at night. I mean, the bed would collapse, it would squash you.
That's right.
I never say never, but I think it's highly unlikely that we'd ever do that, to be
Yeah,
perfectly.
I think I
Great
agree with
question.
that.
Great question, though. And then there's kind of one more I'll ask you, which is going to be more your stuff. And then I think we'll probably go to a break because this one's going to be a bit of a mind bender. So, what does wave particle duality mean?
What does wave particle duality mean? Well, I think trying to think of the best way to explain this would, I guess, mean that we tend to think of things either as, or matter, either as particles. So they have some kind of mass and they obey sort of Newtonian mechanics, I push it and it'll move and it'll take discrete steps. It'll move in a well-defined way. Or we have things that are waves, like sound waves, for example. And in the sort of macroscopic world that we see around them, the two are very distinct and they don't mix. But it turns out that actually, when we get down to a very small level, then we start to have things that have particle-like behavior and they have wave-like behavior. And so they don't obey the sort of rules you'd expect waves to behave all the time, and they don't obey the rules you'd expect particles to behave all of the time.
And I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's so abstract in terms of the way that we experience the world. It really is hard to get your head around.
Yes.
It is quantum mechanics is certainly a very successful theory, but it is hard to get our head around. And it was interesting talking to Lee Smolin when we had him on, and I think again that was one of our popular episodes. Although not everyone agreed with him, we did get one or two comments where people quite strongly felt that he was on the wrong track. But I enjoyed talking to him personally. Don't
Oh,
know.
me too. I thought it was great. And I think one of the difficulties is when it comes to the quantum world, it's not something we can see.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then it becomes difficult to understand, even if, yeah, it becomes difficult to understand what the concepts, as you said, because we can't see them with our eyes.
Yeah. Should we go to a break? And then we've got a few more questions after the break.
Sure. Yep,
I
let's
think
do
we'll
that.
hear a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Tim. You're looking particularly snazzy today. What are you wearing?
I'm wearing a piece from a company called Grace and Garbo, and actually, you know a little bit more about them than I do, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right, I do. And
You're
as
the
you can see,
fashion queen, yeah.
I'm also wearing a piece from Grace and Garbo. So this is a delightful knitwear outfit set up in Birmingham. What they do is they source knitwear, quality knitwear from all around the world. So it's vintage, one-off pieces, many of which they then hand embellish, like the one you're wearing today with its beautiful purple flowers. And so they're big on sustainability. Nothing goes to waste. Everything is sort of recycled and reused. And if you want to know more about them, then have a look at the link beneath this episode.
And thank you very much to them for supporting our podcast. I hope their sales soar.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Grace and Garbo.
Well, welcome back, everyone. So, should we continue working our way through the few questions? Because we've
Sure.
also not only had kind of questions relating to the episodes which we went through before, and there's just a selection of the ones we've received, but we've also got much more kind of general ones, and perhaps even a slightly more philosophical.
Yeah.
So, who do you want to kick off, or do you want me to kick off with these ones?
I don't mind. So I can start if you like.
Okay.
So how about, are there any questions that science cannot answer?
Certainly at the moment, there are questions that science hasn't answered. So, we don't fully understand consciousness, for example. We can measure it in patterns of brain
Yes.
waves, but we don't really know where we know it comes from the brain, but we don't exactly know yet why we're conscious. And some people refer kind of the problem with sort of defining consciousness as the hard problem of consciousness. So they sort of say that
Right.
if we were to fully understand the brain and how the brain worked, every single neuron, every single synapse, we still wouldn't understand where consciousness comes from. But other people say, well, actually, if you built something as complicated as the brain, is it not inevitable that consciousness would emerge? And they sort of say, well, the hard problems are sort of the wrong question to ask. I guess we don't know why there is something rather than nothing. So we don't know why there's a universe, how that came about. Again, there's some theories that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
nothingness that was before was was unstable. But I quite like wind on this one. I quite like winding up my philosophy friends who, if you tell them yes, science will eventually be able to. If you want to wind up a philosopher, just say science will be eventually be able to answer all questions, and you will be redundant. And that always winds. I don't think it's really true, but that winds them up. What's
I
your
can
take on
imagine.
What's your take on that question? What do you think science might not be able to answer?
As you said, it's a really tough one, and I think something sort of actually interestingly, I was talking to my students today about in tutorials was sort of how we're always at the mercy of the lowest, of the resolution of our equipment.
Okay.
Right. Right. And so at some point, we can't see any further because of the equipment and the technology we have at our disposal. So at some point, the telescopes get bigger and better. We can see further. The microscopes get better and we can see smaller. And so those boundaries keep changing. And I wonder there if at some point, I guess if we fix for me, if we fix the issue of the fundamental forces. The Lee Smolin episode, the unifying theory. I personally think many things will fall out of that.
No, okay. I mean, that will be, and so it's exciting to talk to people who are working in that area. I think that's true. I do wonder whether, when we work with sort of complex systems, which we all do, there are so many moving parts. I don't think we'll necessarily be able to perfectly predict how those complex systems are going to behave. But I do think we might be able to come out with generalities in terms of what their behaviors look like. And I think to one thing is when we say will science be able to answer these questions, I think it depends what the questions are. So, will I ever be able to predict what Woofler is going to do next? Well, maybe I will go to sleep or ask for a treat, but no, but not, I mean, in terms of more accurately than that, quite possibly not. But because that's, all living things are quite complicated, very complicated, and there's so many moving parts. I'm not sure we'll ever come up with predictions, but maybe we should do something on prediction and
Yeah.
what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we come up with the range of predictions, right? Something
Yeah.
happens within this spectrum, and that maybe is close as we can get.
No, I think that's right. So I've got one for you. Um,
Sure.
and we again, this is something we might think about in the future. So will we ever find a cure for aging? This is kind of a dream that people have, isn't it? Sort of immortality, being able to live for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and in some ways, progress is being made on that, in that the various, if you break it down into processes, various processes that lead to aging. For example, things like why does our skin change over time? Why does it become less sort of elastic? Why do we get wrinkles? Those sort of things. Why do our muscles not work in the same way? And I think we have answers to lots of those things already.
Mm, mm.
And we already know about the effects of diet, for example. We know about the effect of calorific intake, the sort of fats and this kind of thing. And so I think it may not be immortality, but it's getting close. And then it comes down to, I guess, whether normal wear and tear, if that can ever not happen, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I mean, so the other thing, we have extended lifespans by being able to treat and cure so many diseases. So, people are living longer, partly because this is a fantastic success of civilization. In most parts of the world, we've really managed to very significantly reduce neonatal mortality and early
That's
life
right.
mortality. So that pushes it out. And medicine's really focusing on the diseases of the elderly more now, to some
Yeah.
extent, cancers and what have you. But I still think, there's at the moment it looks as if there's limits to lifespan of around 120 years at the extreme. And then I think your mitochondria wear out. I think, they're kind of doing
Yeah.
these difficult, challenging
That's right. Energy
reactions with,
harvesting. Yeah.
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 So yeah, so I think we might be able to extend lifespan a little bit, but I don't think, we're going to be living for thousands of years.
No. Maybe we should see if we can get Venki Ramakrishnan on the show. He wrote a book on
Yeah.
this topic not that long ago, so that would be kind of fun.
Yeah, that's what we should ask. Definitely.
Yeah, we should ask him. He's a nice guy.
Good.
Okay, so my turn to get one for you. Aha, here we go. Is evolution real?
Yeah.
Let's see how many
Yeah.
people you can upset with this, Tim.
Yes. I mean, and so, it's interesting because evolution, we can measure evolution. Well, evolution is driven by, okay, so evolution is defined as a change in allele frequencies. So the
Mhm.
frequency of different genetic types within a population. And it can be driven by selection, natural selection, sexual selection. So we can measure evolution by a change in allele frequencies. We can measure the strength of selection with things like selection differentials and selection gradients. We know how to do that. So we can predict how things change and we can measure that. And we see these things happen. I mean, so it's defined. We have models that predict how it works. Those models aren't always quite right because, again, we're dealing with complex systems where it's not just, say, one gene, but there's lots of genes that are interacting together. But no, evolution is very real. Charles Darwin got it right, and then adding the genetics in, the genetic variation in, allowed us to kind of understand that you need genetic variation that arises through mutations, and then we have selection operating on that. So there's a very well-defined body of evidence, and if you play that out for long enough, then eventually, as long as populations become separated, you can eventually get speciation occurring. And I think that's what people struggle with is the sheer amount of time that there's been available for evolution to occur. And life's animal life has been around for over 500 million years, up to 800 million years. Life on Earth for 4 billion. That's a staggeringly long
Is-
time for things to come about.
And I think what hasn't certainly I was thinking about myself growing up and some of my ideas of where we came from and evolution and things. When there's other factors like a faith or a religion, the time spans there actually are quite different. And so, the concept of religions have not been, as we know them now, have not been around anywhere near as long as obviously as life and people. And so that disparity, I think, can be quite difficult to get one's head round.
No, I think that's right. And, although I personally don't believe in a God, I don't think that evolution and religion necessarily need to be at loggerheads. I mean, I don't think it's not something for me, but and that I think comes from, well, we know that that comes from this kind of view, certainly in the Western world, that humans were sort of top of some sort of evolutionary pyramid, which isn't true. Yeah, we're unusual, but many species are unusual. And then, when Darwin sort of said, well, actually, we've evolved from apes, that at that point, that put evolution and religion against one another. And it's amazing that's still going on, actually. I think that debate,
It very much is still raging, actually. I,
yeah,
I saw something earlier today online.
no, exactly. So I've got one for you, which I think you might have planted, Simon. What is an enzyme?
I did not.
No, I know you didn't. I know you didn't. What is an enzyme and why are they important? So, chemistry.
So an enzyme is a protein. Well, actually, it doesn't have to be. You can get RNA enzymes.
Hmm.
An enzyme is a molecule that changes the course of a chemical reaction. So it makes it it rem- so it reduces the activation barrier. So basically, you don't need as much energy for that reaction to occur. All
Okay,
right. It does that by changing the pathway.
so without an enzyme, you might have to sort of heat a sort of beaker full of chemicals up to 90 degrees to get something to go.
That's right.
With an enzyme, you might only need to heat up to 50 degrees or something.
Yeah, exactly. And one way of thinking of this actually is say if I'm out hiking in the Peak District and I see a big hill ahead of me and I need to get over onto the other side. Without the enzyme, I would have to go over the big peak to get to the other side, but the enzyme would find me a route around it.
And a
Does that-
taxi to take you.
Yeah, and well, yeah, that's right. And so it would be a lot faster.
And how do they do it?
How do they do it?
I
They
mean,
they
is it,
they
yeah, do they sort of bend molecules around and, stress them and what have you?
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways. And one of the things is that they recognize the thing they act on, the thing they're helping, if you like, the reactant. They recognize them very exquisitely. So they've evolved over years to recognize them, and then yeah, sometimes they can use a water molecule to help them. Sometimes they can use a metal or something, and yeah, they will do something that makes it more favorable for that reaction to occur. Sometimes, like a little bit like imagining holding on and bringing the two things together, so they'll see each other and meet a lot faster than they would randomly just walking around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I completely see that.
And I think what's exciting now is, and David Baker talked about this towards the end of the episode we did with him, is that designer enzymes and enzymes that can sort of propagate themselves, that's the next sort of frontier for protein design, really,
And I
is to
think
be,
that's probably what motivated this question, I imagine. So,
yes, I think
others,
so.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think so. Okay, so time for me to ask you one. Aha, here we are. So, Tim, will artificial intelligence take over the world and kill us all?
So this must come from the Chris Summerfield episode on AI. I really enjoyed reading his book, and I'm probably quite influenced by that. His book was called These Strange New Minds, and If not anytime soon is the answer to that. So there's no doubt that large language models are amazing bits of technology, and they're very good at convincing us that, it's like talking to a person because, they're so knowledgeable and
Yes.
they speak so fluently in terms of coming up with their answers. But they're very different to us. They're not experiencing the world in the same way. They're not rewiring themselves continuously in the same way
No.
as our brains do. They don't have they don't have things like the hippocampus that are involved in memory and recall and what have you. So at the moment, they're a great tool. People are obviously trying to work to sort of improve them the whole time. But and there are some people, particularly some of the kind of tech bros in California, who argue that yeah, within 5 years, the AIs will take over the world, and they actually argue that once you've got a good AI, an intelligent AI, you basically ask it to make the next most intelligent AI, and they kind of ramp themselves up until they argue gets to something like a singularity. So I did ask, when I read that, I did ask ChatGPT how to build me the next kind of best, ChatGPT 8 or whatever said, just build it for me.
Right.
And it said, no, you have to do it like this. And then I said, how do I become ruler of the universe? And it gave me a plan, and I said, don't tell anyone. But it wouldn't, I mean, it gave some quite funny, quite trite answers. But no, to be perfectly honest, it's a really useful tool. It's incredibly useful in science. I don't think it's not sentient, and it's not going to be sentient anytime soon. So the thought of it like, Terminator, 2 when the robots take
Yeah.
over is still fiction, fortunately. What about you? I mean, do you have any thoughts on this, Simon?
Yeah, I agree. It is total fiction. I mean, it's as you said, they're not sentient. That's it. That's kind of the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
They're trained to do certain things. They do those certain things they're trained to do. They're limited by their training data that can expand, but it until they can sort of make these cross links and sort of start, yeah, as you said, start thinking, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. This is not going to happen.
No. Well, we should probably wrap up because we've been chatting away for half an hour or so.
Gosh.
So I have to say I'm just delighted by how many people are engaging, and I hope they continue to listen and like it and send in questions. I mean,
Yeah.
have you got any thoughts about what we should do in kind of coming episodes over the next kind of 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in some ways the episodes we've done so far have been in a way safe places for both of us because we were new and we've started with sort of areas where we felt pretty comfortable, although perhaps the quantum mechanics one was way beyond us. So I think I'd like to get bit more adventurous maybe in some ways. I mean in terms of the topic. So perhaps sort of, out in space a bit more, maybe volcanoes, maybe going back in history and dinosaurs.
Oh, we should do a dinosaur one. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
I think that'd be fun. And I think also I think the sustainability um that theme is important and will continue to be important. So perhaps something on next generation batteries, something like that would be really
That's a
useful,
good
I think.
idea. Yeah, good idea. I'd quite like to do something on black holes, I think. A bit more spacey stuff, as you kind of mentioned earlier on there.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Anyway, great chatting to you as always. And I think who have we got on next week? I think we've got Max Telford, who's a developmental biologist who's written a book.
Excellent.
So that should be fun. Well, thanks everyone for listening. I'm Tim Colson.
Hi, I'm Sam McCallum.
And good night it is here. So I hope you've enjoyed listening.
Right, take care, folks. Bye.